Okay, hi, Chess.
Hi,
Welcome
Markus.
to Nothing Media. I'm talking to you because you wrote these two books, The Story of You and The Infinite Journey. One of my
Indeed.
favorite books, I think. And they are part of a series that's called Life Beyond Personality. So would you be able to explain these three things? What does the title mean, The Story of You? What does the second one mean, Infinite Journey? And what is a life beyond personality?
I think it's best to start with the word personality and what I mean by that, because that really informs everything I do. So I've got a glossary in those books, as you know, because I think the use of words with this subject in particular, the accurate use of words is very important. So I have this glossary where I define my use, my application of these words, because it helps for clarity of communication. So I'm going to read out the definition in the book of personality, and then perhaps we can discuss that and go into exactly what I mean if there are any questions. So personality is the construct of you, an identity built on the building blocks of the contraction, emotion, beliefs, desires, and hope. The personality has a function of self-preservation. It is programmed to maintain its sense of absolute authority. In the personality, the mind is king, and all of its thoughts, beliefs, and emotions, which are mostly the product of your past, are in control of your life.
So one can assume that personality just enters the scene and never leaves until the end.
The end meaning death?
Meaning death. Like most people would just identify as a personality and then.
Yes, I would say that that's most people's experience, yeah. And what I write about is the unusual or rare, apparently, experience of the seeing through of the personality, the identification with it happens within the life. So it's a kind of death. It's a death of an identification with the personality, as described in that description. So just to clarify a bit more, this is not the death of the self. The self is something that develops soon after childhood that we all need. It's the ability to have the appearance that I'm here and you're there, and to operate the functionality of oneself in the world. So self is needed, but the way I talk about it is the personality is what develops on top of that self, which you could call the full self. And the personality develops, it's not neutral. The self is neutral, it's just an operating system. But on top of it lies all these, it gets covered with emotions and all these things I've said, the hope, desires, beliefs. And all of that builds around the wound. And the wound is the moment when we lose our grounding in being. And being is part of what we come into this world with in the natural state. So there's a point where we lose that. Everybody knows that. But what I focus on, because the way out of that dream is to understand how you got into it, is the formation of the personality, what it's constructed of, and around the seeing through of it, because that's how one becomes free of identification with it. So by identification with the personality, we suffer a certain kind of suffering, personality suffering, that comes from that identification with it. So that may be neuroses, constant mind chatter, negativity towards oneself, lack of self-love. All these kind of things are a type of suffering that I'm saying is unnecessary if one finds this, which is a disidentification from the personality from which all that suffering arises. So it's not the end of suffering, it's the end of personality suffering.
So could I say that it's the end of a personal agenda?
Well, I think we can still have agendas in this. You know what? So, because the other thing, we need to lay out this landscape. There's another thing in the landscape, which is character, right? So, character is, the way I define it, is our talents, our things that make us distinct. You know, you come from the same parents, but you may have a very different set of idiosyncrasies and talents than your brother. And those things are kind of just a natural part of who we are, and they're beautiful and they're special and they're to be celebrated. So, for example, I'm an artist, and that's part of my character. I see that as part of my character. So I may have it depends really what you mean by an agenda. You know, I may have an agenda to fulfill my artistic creativity, if you want to call that an agenda, but that's different from a personality and agenda. So a personality agenda would be, for example, I need to be the best artist because I feel inferior. And therefore there's a tension and a stress in needing to be the best or the biggest selling, or I have jealousy for other people who are doing better than me. All those sort of things would be suffering that comes out of the agenda of the personality, which feels lesser. A type of personality that feels lesser. I mean, some personalities, of course, do the opposite and feel, you know, more than, and they're full of kind of self-aggrandizement. In the personality, the mind is king. So basically, the personality is very identified and safe with the mind. It's like its center of functioning. If you think of that in relation to being is not mind-centered. The natural state is not mind-centered. It's being-centered. It's beyond the mind. So in life beyond personality, it's not, there's no mind anymore. That would be ridiculous. I'm using my mind now. But the mind is kind of not in the service of the personality. It's used when it's needed. And in fact, it can become more efficient. So therefore, if you are walking, there would be more of that beingness rather than the mind constantly chattering. And therefore, you would be in relation to the nature you were walking through, more deeply in relation to it, because there wouldn't be the mind and then that out there.
So you're saying by definition, personality is more in the mind than in feelings?
Oh, definitely. Because feelings are, you know, a threat to personality. And the reason for that is that personality developed in a response to the wound. And the wound is the moment when we lost our natural state, which is our, you know, one level you can see it as our groundedness in being and our relationship to oneness, our being within oneness. There's a point where we lose that and we start to enter the relative level more, and in relationships with parents and everything, which is all natural and all good. But there is a point where our connection to the everything is lost and becomes focused down so much, and we become this thing, this self, and we lose that sense of beingness and enter into gradually into the personality. So there's great pain involved in the wound. I mean, this is a massive subject in itself, but the personality learns to protect itself. It's part of its job is to protect itself from pain of feelings, and it does that by closing down our openness to feelings. So feelings are a threat to the personality. So this personality develops, and in many ways, you can see that it does a great job. It keeps our life running, and it gives a sense of who we are, and it protects ourselves from feelings we don't want to feel. So all these things are working, and you could say it's an efficient thing and it works well. But there is this downside. There is a suffering involved in it, as I've mentioned earlier. And also, I wouldn't call it our natural state. It's something that arises, but it's, if you look at a newborn baby, we don't begin in that same space that we become enveloped in and identified with. So when we come, we don't have the personality suffering. That's the payoff for the protection and the life that the personality gives us. You know, many people, when they hear about this, well, not many people, but some people will say, what do you mean life beyond personality? I am my personality, and we need our personality. And all I can say is that if that's your experience, then you haven't experienced life beyond personality, because you would know that there is something, a way of living that is beyond it, that has a very different flavor to it.
So you're saying that for yourself, I'm not sure if it's still true, but if at all personality enters the game, then the distance to uncovering it is infinitely small, so it can never establish.
Yes, I would say that, yeah. There's an important point to be made here too, that, like I said earlier, like, the personality is not bad. It is just something that happens. So it's not about making the personality the bogeyman. It's just about seeing life as it is. And if one has a yearning or a sense that there is something else, which often comes through people having openings. So for some reason, life gives them the gift of a moment, even a moment or 5 minutes, where they're not subject to the what they're normally subject to, which is the life and the dream of the personality and all of its desires and sufferings. So there can be an experience of that, which can then lead one afterwards to think, what the hell was that? And is that, am I this or am I that? Well, how does this fit into my life? It makes you question your ongoing everyday experience. And it can start a search and a yearning to find what I'm talking about here, which is life beyond personality.